The $1.1 trillion Cromnibus spending agreement between Republicans and Democrats in the House is growing closer and closer with every passing hour to actually passing. They had 2 test votes earlier today. Those passed with basically razor-thin margins at this point.
It's not really an agreement between Democrats and Republicans.
Well, initially it was. Well, what do you mean?
It's entirely Republicans.
I think that the Democrats were given some things that we may not like, but I think they were things that they actually liked.
The initial passage of it, there were no Democrats involved. I mean, they lost Republicans.
Oh, you're talking about the passage. I'm talking about the actual, the package itself was somewhat of a collaboration between Democrat and Republican leaders in both the Senate and the House. But they did pass test votes earlier today, and at any moment, actually probably while we're filming this this video, it could well pass the House. It's expected to, I believe, at this point, although some Republicans have refused to sign on to it. It was 16 or 17 at last count, either feeling like they couldn't sign on to some of the stipulations of the spending agreement, or they felt that it simply didn't go far enough, perhaps not doing enough to shut down President Barack Obama's executive action when it comes to immigration reform. But while we're talking about the president, that's perhaps the most important addition to the discussion today. The White House is backing this agreement. They're suggesting that Democrats in the House and the Senate should support it, saying the administration supports House passage of H.R. 83, making appropriations for fiscal year 2015 and for other purposes, which to me sounds a little bit nefarious. And I believe it is actually somewhat nefarious when you get down to the details.
So the bill would fund the government through September. It would only fund the Department of Homeland Security through the first part of the year. That's the slight Republican attempt to win back some control and continue the fight over.
Believing that they can shut it down at that time when they have the majority.
Not so much shut it down. Look, I don't think
they think they can, or at least they're saying they think they can.
They want to get what they want. They want to win, whatever that is, whether that be a shutdown or forcing the president's hand. Democrats are not happy with this bill in general, and nor should they be. It's an incredibly bad bill. The counter argument to that would be that they have an incredibly shitty minority.
Exactly, yes.
So, there's very little leverage left for Democrats here. But, the president had the ability to veto it. But, again...
Well, but that would well be the leverage.
That's the
possibility
leverage.
that could be voted out in the Senate or it could be vetoed.
Right, but...
We're going to go into their explanations of why they're not doing that, but they could, in theory, do it.
But if the president ends up being the one to veto it, then I think the theory is that then the control over who's to blame for shutting down the government shifts.
Yep, to the president.
To the president.
Assuming that he doesn't do anything to frame why he's being forced by the extremist right-wing majority in the House to veto it. He could make that case. He might fail.
It's all about framing, which I would argue that the president hasn't been so great at so far. But I do agree with Ben. If he doesn't use the right type of framing, all the blame is going to be shifted toward him. Which, I mean, it is his second term, the end of his second term. Is that really the worst thing in the world? I don't think so.
We went through a shutdown last year, and I think that although the Republicans certainly bounced back in advance of the election, at the time they did shoulder the brunt of the burden for it. I think that if he were to point out a few of the things that we've pointed out in videos throughout this week about some of the insane additions to this bill, the adding in the F-35s that the military doesn't even want, the massive raise to the caps in political contributions to political parties, I mean, those sorts of things, the cutting the nutritional assistance to poor urban schools, like the inability of the president to now continue on.
They're cutting, sure, I know you guys went over it, but cutting nutritional assistance to poor schools and giving the military weapons that they didn't ask for.
Yeah.
But weapons manufacturers have to make money.
Yeah.
I mean, what do we
They got kids in school, too.
And historically, the military often quite humble in their requests. They really needed those.
Yeah, I don't know.
No, of course they didn't. He could have tried that. Now, that's not the Barack Obama that we've come to expect outside of campaign season. He's not going to push forward like that. But he did do, or at least I should say the administration and his spokespeople, tried to explain why he's pushing for Democrats to support this. So we have some explanations for that. The administration said it appreciated funding for national security priorities, including $5 billion to fight the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, and $5.4 billion to combat the Ebola epidemic. Now, I could see how the money to fight Ebola, especially abroad, might well not have been forthcoming from the Republican Congress. But the idea that they didn't want to spend the $5 billion to fight ISIS, that's a win for the president, that is BS.
They were going to fund that effort.
Yeah.
No, but to me, in a sense, if he were a real negotiator, then that would have been a sign of, look what I'm doing for you. I'm giving you guys credit for that, even though we all know, of course, everybody was going to fund that. Nobody doesn't fund that.
Yeah.
So because the troops are in harm's way, they're already there. So
I would probably fund that.
right. So so maybe that's what that is. I don't know. It's very unclear to me exactly how this is going to play out. Although in the end, the Wall Street being allowed to return to derivatives trading.
Yes, exactly.
The military getting a bunch of weapons and a bunch of planes that they didn't ask for. No funding for nutritional help for kids in low-income schools, and a giant increase in the amount of money you can give to political parties. I'm pretty sure that stuff's going to stay in.
I mean,
Yeah, likely.
all of this shows you just how weak Democrats were in the midterm elections. I know we went over this a billion times already, but think about what this party is doing to the middle class and working class, and these are the individuals that went to the polls and voted for them, right? They are screwing you over, and they still went out there and voted for them. It's incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, and look, but by the way, in your last comment, you pointed out that I totally undersold why people should be so opposed to this. I mean, all the things that we talked about are important, of course, and there are many more. I mean, it's a well over 1,000-page document. But it's, if nothing else, it's the change to re-allow banks to engage in derivatives trading and things like that. Look, I mean, the thing that took down the economy, they're now allowing the banks to do that again. And then, after doing that, which is bad enough, they then spit in the American public's face by saying the reason they're doing that is because of the inability to engage in the trading of these exotic financial instruments is hurting community banks and small businesses. Because the hardware store on Venice, they wanted to trade derivatives on the international market, and they just couldn't do it. And that's why wrenches cost as much as they do these days.
It's such horseshit. There are no community banks. They've been shuttered around the country.
Because they couldn't do derivatives trading.
And even branches in small communities are shut down. And of course it has nothing to do. The Bank of America branch in Waco, Texas, in the northwest corner of Waco didn't shut down because they couldn't do derivatives trading. It's insane. Yeah. The whole argument is insane. It's just frustrating. But to those progressives, like-minded as I am on most issues, like, this is where it matters. And I'm not going to pretend that the difference between a Democratic-controlled Congress and a Republican-controlled Congress is so widespread that we get to dance in the streets. We don't. Yeah. The Democrats have proven to be incredibly misleading. It wouldn't be this budget.
Yeah, no,
Stuff matters. Elections matter. Yeah. This is a result of that. And if there is nothing passed here, and if the government, I guess, shuts down for a while we got a stock market that's through the roof, which is the reason the president is saying that they're supporting it right now, because he doesn't want to slow a growing, bustling economy. If you wait until after January 2nd or January 3rd or whenever these bozos get sworn in, well, then believe me, the bill doesn't be worse. It doesn't get better.
Yeah. Well, unless, and this is going even beyond what I would expect, they were able to put so much pain on them for trying to force. I agree with you. It would be a different bill if we had a Democratic majority. But at the same time, if the president doesn't come out, even if he's going to end up, end up signing it, if he doesn't at least say more than he's saying right now, and you don't just have basically Pelosi and maybe Elizabeth Warren has been saying some good things, then the difference doesn't matter at all, because the American public's going to say, oh, well, it looks like the Democrats are in favor of cutting the nutritional assistance, and they want more derivatives, and they think that the richest.
And by the way, I'm not entirely sure the Democrats don't want more derivatives. There's just no sign.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah, you're totally right. And in fact, it says here, Josh Earnest, the press secretary of the White House, said that the legislation fulfilled many of the top-line priorities of the president. Yeah, I know what he means there, but that also is nefarious.
Look, the party that has Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders is more likely to stop derivatives trading in the long run.
Yes.
But not if they're the only two people who talk about it and give a shit about it.
Exactly.
So real quick, you mentioned it. Let's mention Maxine Waters, who we don't often quote on the show. Top Democrat on the House Financial Services Committee, wrote a letter to colleagues Thursday saying, quote, something that we'd like to see more of. If there was ever a time to fight for democratic values, that time is now. You mentioned Nancy Pelosi. She was said this, and reflecting a rare, blunt criticism of Obama and the White House. I'm extremely disappointed the White House feels the only way they can get a bill is to go along with this. That would be the only reason I think they would say they would sign such a bill. We're being asked to vote for a moral hazard, she says. Why is this in an appropriations bill? Because it was the price to pay to get an appropriations bill. This is ransom, she said. This is blackmail. You don't get a bill unless Wall Street gets its taxpayer coverage. It's really so sad.
It's a spending bill, and they shut down. So the District of Columbia, which you're going to get into, legalized recreational marijuana. They said, no, we can't have that. It's so important that we shut that down, that we put that in here. The president and the State Department just signed an agreement in principle with China a massive agreement that's going to benefit the climate going on for decades. And in this bill, it says that you cannot push for fewer coal-fired power plants in China, that needs to be in this bill. That is insanity. And unfortunately, it's insanity that the Democrats, including Barack Obama, are going to join into.